Hello there, and welcome to Andre's Artist Profiles. There are some musicians and songwriters and general musical artists out there who have such a very firmly established sound and musical aesthetic that people tend to ignore them as being in the background because they're so incredibly consistent. One of those artists is James Taylor. He is going to be turning 66 years old today. All of my life, I sort of understood James Taylor to sort of be one of those artists who was rather of a piece, as I just said. But, when I actually started to really listen deeper into his stuff than just the hits, which I already found to be rather varied, I found that same varied effect actually went throughout his albums. I think a lot of the things about James Taylor that people find to be a bit too consistent is the fact that his singing voice and his melodic style is so, firmly established. That's all one can say about James Taylor. He's a firmly established artist. And what happened is that in 1968, I believe, or early 69, when Paul McCartney was helping the other Beatles really get the Apple record label started, one of the acts that he signed was a very young James Taylor, who at that point would have been called, I suppose, a folkie. I don't know if the term singer-songwriter existed yet. James Taylor, of course, was more than a mere folkie. He had a much broader depth, than the average folk rocker, including blues and soul and you name it. And in 1968, I believe, this album came out on Apple, simply called James Taylor. Now, much later on, songs like Something in the Way She Moves and Carolina on My Mind, In My Mind, actually became huge hits. But there's a song on here called Knockin' Round the Zoo, which is a really funky blues rock jam, which has a lot of kind of like odd vocal sounds in it. It's kind of psychedelic too. More in line with a Blood, Sweat, and Tears kind of jazz rock Chicago style. And you could see that James Taylor had a lot more on his palette than just, folk rock. Again, Paul Simon would be a very good comparison. There's a full picture of James Taylor just kind of lounging there. James was dealing with some drug problems at that time, but he gained new ground. He signed up with Warner Brothers and released this album in 1970, Sweet Baby James. And, this album really started a huge sensation, of course, with the song Fire and Rain. I mean, it's been covered by so many people, and, that I think is James Taylor's signature song. And there's also another song on here called Country Road that's very nice. He does some great soul and blues on this album. Again, produced by Peter Asher of Peter and Gordon, who stayed with him for the Apple days and through much of his career at that point. The James Taylor train continued with Mudslide Slim and the Blue Horizon, which featured the Carole King song You've Got a Friend as the major hit from this particular album. Again, very much like Sweet Baby James. The next album was One Man Dog in 1972. A lot of even James Taylor's most ardent admirers are not really that crazy about this album. They feel that it's a bit unusual. Some of these songs are very short. It didn't have any obvious hits on it like the first two albums did, but it really showcased that James Taylor, could do instrumentals, and I love the fact that Fender Rhodes is featured so prominently there, the Suitcase Rhodes. It had a very soulful sound, and I think because James Taylor drew so much from the blues in his music, that folk blues mixture is going to have some soul in it somewhere, and that's true for this album. The next album, Walking Man, from 1974, was a similar affair. A lot of people didn't think of it as much of a success because it imitated the sound so much of the last four albums, but Walking Man actually became a big hit for him. I think this is actually out of print now, from 1974. The next album, Gorilla, actually revived some of his fortunes a little bit. James Taylor had a hit with the Marvin Gaye song, How Sweet It Is to Be Loved by You, produced by Lenny Waronker and Russ Titelman. The sound on this 1975 album is quite a lot slicker, and he had another big successful song with Mexico. The next album was 1976's In the Pocket. This album is actually a funk album for all intents and purposes. You know, Stevie Wonder wrote a ballad on here and played harmonica on a song called Don't Be Sad 'Cause Your Sun Is Down. So this is James Taylor's funk soul album, more or less. That's how I feel about it. Great album. I really suggest James Taylor fans seek it out. And he had a huge hit on this album with Shower the People, which, again, had that soulful flavor to it. The next album, which was recorded on CBS in 1977, was JT. And he had another big hit, another rather soulful adult contemporary type song called Your Smiling Face. By this time, you know, James Taylor wasn't really per se a folk artist as much as he was an adult contemporary one with a good deal of soul influences. And this album was a very successful one for him from 1977. This was during the time he was married to Carly Simon. That marriage dissolved after that, and James Taylor was having difficulty shaking his drug addiction, and released this album in 1979 called The Flag. He had a cover of the old Drifters song Up on the Roof on this album. Overall, it's a somewhat rockier set with somewhat louder guitars. Not what you'd expect for an artist like James Taylor, really, but, you know, it showed that he wasn't afraid to try something a little different. The next album, Dad Loves His Work, from 1981, finds James Taylor going back into James Taylor territory. You know, that kind of mellow, slick, adult contemporary rock, pop, easy listening sound, whatever. Adult contemporary is a better name for it. Love that back cover. Looks kind of like an old Soviet Union type picture or something, like a Bruce Springsteen concept kind of thing. Is the inside of the CD. I like those colors. The next album, this is actually one of my favorites. That's Why I'm Here really introduced James Taylor to the new production style of the 80s. I see it as kind of James Taylor's Oh Mercy. It keeps his songwriting intact, but it updates the production a little bit. From 1985. Produced with Frank Filippi. I love this album. Peter Asher returns on it. It's one of my favorites by him. The other James Taylor album I have is New Moon Shine from 1991. Not that dissimilar from That's Why I'm Here, but again, you know, after this, James Taylor banked on being more dependable than the amazing, changing Eclectic. But the fact of the matter is, James Taylor has a wonderful body of musical work that is appreciated by many, and even those that get a little bit bored with what they feel is his predictability should listen to his albums a little bit more than just his greatest hits, because as an album artist, this man offered a great deal of depth, and I wish him and his children and his family and all of his friends in the music world, Carole King and Carly Simon, of course, a very happy 66 to Sweet Baby James. See you all next time.